So my name is Larry Morris, and I am the product manager for SUSE's SUSE Enterprise Storage product. And this is a much more of a business-focused discussion than it is a technical discussion, but there's a small enough group. If you've got questions, I can entertain those, or we can interject them into the discussion. So I've broken the flow into 4 primary areas. We're going to start by talking about some of the challenges that traditional enterprise storage interjects to customers. There's a primary research project that we just completed, and I'll touch on some of the information we got from that. Then I'm going to shift, and we're going to introduce SUSE Enterprise Storage and the concept of software-defined storage. Then I'm going to talk a little bit more about the use cases, and then we'll shift and go into a little bit of the discussion around version 4, which we introduced on Tuesday. So as we talk with customers, just a little bit about my background. So I've been with SUSE about 2 years. Prior to that, I had about 25 years with Hewlett-Packard. I managed the worldwide engineering team that was responsible for the mid-range product family at HP. So most of my experience is in either designing or developing traditional enterprise products. But as you talk with customers, there really are 3 issues that seem to bubble up to the top that they identify with traditional enterprise products. And the first of those is a direct reaction to the amount of data. I find it interesting. IDC talks about 40 zettabytes of information in the year 2020. I don't even know what a zettabyte is. And there'll be 40 zettabytes of information in 2020. To put that in some kind of perspective, between 2010 and 2020, that's a 5,000% increase in the amount of information. If we look at it from a year-to-year basis, it's about every 18 months that digital information doubles. Now the challenge with this is when you purchase a traditional storage product, what you normally do is you'll buy the frame and you'll half fill it with disk mechanisms with the idea then I've got some upward capacity that as my business needs continue to increase, I can go ahead and put more mechanisms in. As you talk with customers, it's usually about a year, sometimes 2 years, and they'll have completely filled up that expansion space that they have, and then they go about the process of talking with the traditional enterprise vendor, buying the next version of the product that they have, and repeating that cycle over and over. You've got to do something different. We really need solutions that can scale into, if we're going to get into the zettabytes, we need solutions that at least can scale into the exabytes. And traditional enterprise products can't do that or don't do it well. The second is expense. I'm not going to disclose any of the information that I had from my previous background, but I'm going to talk in detail about a presentation done by a Gartner analyst by the name of Roger Cox. So Roger was here, Gartner was here. I had dinner with Roger Tuesday night. I'm going to use some of the information he gave in a presentation earlier this year where he's talking about real-world expense, traditional enterprise storage relative to software-defined storage. And you all know how expensive traditional enterprise storage is. Third, we're going to talk about this transition and the challenge with the transition. The cloud service providers have really introduced the concept of a software-defined infrastructure. And one of the survey points we'll touch on is that there's increased pressure on IT organizations to be more responsive, to really adapt and be able to have a flexible software structure that enables you to replace the silos that are usually compute and storage and networking with a hardware infrastructure that's a lot more adaptable and a lot more flexible. So these are the 3 primary issues we see and we hear over and over again with traditional storage. So let's go into the survey. So we contract with a company called Loud House Research. They visited and surveyed 1,202 customers. Now these customers came from small businesses, so they define small as about 250 to 1,000 customers, mid-range, which was 1,000 to 5,000, and large, which was larger than 5,000. They came from 11 different countries, and they represented all industries. So this is a pretty accurate, statistically accurate survey. Look at the issues that bubble up to the top. I don't know how to manage the volumes of data that I have, the cost of my storage, planning for that growth, administering that growth, silos of storage. I've been around the business for 25 years. These are not new problems. but they continue to come back again and again as you visit with enterprise customers. So obviously, we're not doing something right in addressing our customers' needs when it comes to traditional storage. A little bit more detail. So in this question, it was really about what are the top frustrations in your organization. The number one frustration is the cost. The overall cost that I have to pay for traditional storage. Just to talk a little bit more about that. Data is growing exponentially, as we talked about. I don't know a customer whose budget is growing faster than what, 3 to 5% a year? So they've got a problem. You've got exponential growth, flat budgets, expensive traditional storage. Something has to change. So cost. Then they've got some concerns around really my ability to provide the right level of performance based on what my particular entities within the organization's business needs are, but go through the rest. My environment is complex, it's fragmented. I really don't have the ability to support innovation, and I want to come back and push on this a little bit more. This is an interesting secondary point that's coming up. Lack of agility, lack of scalability. Again, back to that, my frames, they're pretty well structured for what I can do within a frame itself, but I really don't have the ease of attaching another frame on top of it or another frame on top of that and really scaling this as I wish I could. Being tied into legacy vendors. This is a very interesting point. And I'll come back and I'll talk to both comments I've heard from IDC and Gartner. Now again, having been in the storage industry for the majority of my career, loyalty was very common. Customers would have loyalty to NetApp or loyalty to EMC or loyalty to Hitachi Data Systems. Over the last couple of years, this has changed. Customers feel like, frankly, that the traditional storage providers do not have their best interest in mind, and as such, that loyalty is starting to, it's at an all-time low as you look at some of the statistics around this relative to how it's been over the last 15 or 20 years, which is very interesting. And then difficult to manage. Let's go into this capacity a little bit more. So in this research, what we found is about 70% of the customers in this 1,202 companies we talked to have increased storage. Some of them came out and said, frankly, because of my budget constraints, I cannot expand beyond a certain point. Others were in businesses where they're fortunate, the data doesn't increase, but 70% had increasing growth. And you can see it runs pretty evenly across Asia, Europe, Americas, at about 30% on average, but some are up as high as even 70% year over year in their amount of growth that they have year over year that they have to manage within their data center. 9 out of 10 organizations, again, this is one of the number one points that bubbled up to the top, came back and said they're worried, they're concerned, they don't know how they're going to manage this exponential growth. So are these things resonating with you? Are these the sorts of problems, sorts of issues that you have? All right, so they're not new. This was an interesting point that came out of it. The other subtopic that was coming out of the research was the fact that customers, and I think this is directly tied to the cloud service providers and what they've been able to demonstrate around their flexibility, around their cost constraints, or their ability to control costs. That is coming directly back to IT managers, and they're feeling increased pressure to either be more flexible, more agile, able to really evolve to the needs of the respective entities within the business, and they can't do that today. And you hear from many customers as you talk with them, my CIO is telling me it's much easier to go outside my organization and get the sorts of things we need than I can within my own organization. So some of these things have to change and have to change very quickly to enable business to really reach its potential. So let's talk about what one of the primary drivers of this is, and this is large data. And I'm going to go back, I'm going to show my age. When I joined Hewlett-Packard, it was 1986. We were in the process at that point of introducing a brand new disk array. It was about the size of a washing machine. It was 404 megabytes. As a brand new engineer, I volunteered to help with some of the testing that we did on that product. We brought in one of the most powerful business servers we could at the time, and we connected 10 of these disk arrays, or disks, they were simple disks at that time, to this system. 4.4, not even 4.04 gigabytes of capacity. People from all over the Bay Area came to see this system because this was a massive configuration. I'm sure people at the time said, who could possibly use, that much capacity? All right, we've got files today that are hundreds of gigabytes in size. Think about an MRI. If you ever have the unfortunate need to go to a hospital, the MRI is digital. Somebody today visited with me and said they have Excel spreadsheets that are 150 gigabytes in capacity. Not just the macros that are in there, but all of the data that's in there as well. These are massive files. Now you go back and you look at traditional storage, it was designed at a time where it's really for a relational database. I do smaller 4K, 8K, 16K, 64K transfers. I don't, within a traditional storage system, know how to handle these 120, 150, 200 gigabyte files that are becoming more and more common. And it's only going to continue, right? You look at I've got the iPhone 7. Take a couple of pictures with that and look at the size of the files that it's starting to generate. And I need to put them someplace, right? So I store them on Micro Focuses. No, I don't. But, but that's how the data gets eaten up as you go forward. Traditional storage systems really, let's take a mid-range, and that's a good example. That's the one I know the best. It's usually about a half a petabyte in capacity. Doesn't take too many of these 100 gigabyte, 200 gigabyte files before I've started to fill up that 500 terabyte capacity point. And the challenge with this is they're expensive. So who's heard the term just a bunch of disks, or JBOD? It really doesn't stand for just a bunch of disks, right? Internally, you know what we call it internally when you build storage systems? Just a bunch of dollars. And the reality is, because I can go to Fry's and I can buy a disk for this price, but when I buy it from my traditional storage provider, it's 2 or 3 times more expensive. And that's one of the dirty little secrets about the storage industry. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But that's what really drives the cost primarily of these is that, and I'm going to come in and talk about the margin of the businesses that need to be maintained to develop these and maintain these types of products in a moment. On the other hand, object technology, so block is really the oldest storage interface that's been there. Block has really been there from day one. File, whether you look at NetApp or others that put the file capability and the ability to export files on top of it. We started talking about something called attribute managed storage in probably the late 90s. And really attribute managed storage then evolved and became object storage. And the idea of object storage is that I have the capability with metadata and frankly, an undefined growth object, the ability to really store something different than I've had to store in the past. Traditional relational databases are not that large. Object storage is designed to handle very large files into those 100 gigabytes that we talked about earlier. And then you talk about cost. So traditionally, I can pay, let's say list price, so we don't get into street price. I can pay list price, what, $5, $7 per gigabyte for a high-end disk array. Sometimes I can get it down to $2 or $3 per gigabyte. This is my list price. You can purchase object storage, SUSE Enterprise Storage, for example, at 30 cents per gigabyte. So there's a fundamental difference when you talk about the cost structure of these types of products. And let's go into that in a little bit more detail. So I'm not going to disclose anything from my period at HP because that's confidential information. What I'm going to reference is a presentation done, again, by Roger Cox earlier this year. So the first point that Roger drives home is the fundamental difference between industry standard hardware. This is hardware that you purchase from Cisco, Dell, HP, IBM. When you think about traditional servers, those businesses run on a 10 to 15% margin. Now, if you look at Hitachi Data Systems, EMC, any of the Compellent, 3PAR, any of the traditional enterprise businesses, they run on a 55 to 60% margin business. Who do you think is paying for the margin difference between traditional enterprise storage and proprietary storage? This is where that loyalty that used to exist for so long back to the traditional enterprise storage providers is being broken as they realize I'm paying a significant amount of premium for that difference. The one story I will share from my background, because I don't think this is confidential. I mean, we used to buy everybody's product and bring them in, and we weren't reverse engineering how they were designed. We were really interested in the material cost so that we had some idea how much the controllers were costing that our competitors were building. 15 years ago, there was a lot of differentiation. There were a lot of ASICs, there were a lot of custom pieces in the controller designs. Over the last 7, 8 years, as we started to bring those in, we started to realize we're all starting to use the same components, right? The market was starting to commoditize. There's not a lot of difference today between a product you buy from Hitachi Data Systems, a product that you buy from EMC. They're pretty well built on the same products. Many of them run the same core operating system, but yet you're still paying this 50 to 60% margin for the privilege of having a traditional enterprise product. Let's talk some specifics. All right, so this is, again, Gartner. What they did, this is street price too. This is not list price. So Gartner went through the process of going through and identifying a name brand product. In this case, it's a hybrid entry level. So it's got solid state, and the solid state disk arrays are caching or are front ending the spinning media. It's about a 250, 300 terabyte configuration. And then they did a comparison. Over here on the right is the interesting point. So focused on just the CapEx, look at the premium that you pay for the logic or the intelligence in a traditional product relative to a software-defined product. The hard disk drives, remember, just a bunch of dollars. The controllers and the net price. So it's about 53% more expensive. Again, back to that margin difference between a traditional product and a software-defined storage product running on industry standard hardware. This is list price. This is Gartner. We're not sharing anything confidential. They actually went through the process of bidding and got, a name brand product. What's the best price I can get that? Then what's a software-defined storage product and the best price I can get it? It gets worse as you start going up. So take a mid-range product. So this is a traditional mid-range product. And in this case, you can see the 5-year savings of around $300,000. The difference in the overall net price, a little higher than the last example, which is about 53%. This is 54%. Again, these are the types of products you would look at replacing with a software-defined storage product. Last example. So this is a larger mid-range. It's about 740 terabytes in capacity. Street price, 740 terabytes, $1.37 million. Okay? Software-defined storage product, $480,000. Almost $870,000 difference, 63% net price. Okay? So Gartner is the one that is out talking with customers, sharing this, and this is where you start to see that loyalty because customers are realizing I'm paying a significant premium. Now there are use cases that absolutely make sense to deploy these sorts of products. If you're looking at a relational database, my mission critical database, where I'm making all of my business critical decisions, absolutely. But there's a lot of storage. Unstructured data is about 80% of the information that's out there. We'll talk about that in a second. Can you continue with budgets that are only increasing 3 to 5%? Can you continue to pay this sort of premium for traditional storage? And the answer from the customer base is no. So let's come in and talk a little bit more about software-defined storage. So this is a rough high-level architecture of the open source project Ceph. Ceph is, at least in SUSE's opinion, and there's several others in this room from Intel, from HP, and others that are part of this project. We view this as a tremendous software-defined storage product. A couple of key points I draw your attention to. Look at the number of downloads. Almost 306 million times this product has been downloaded. Unique downloads, almost 37.5 million. This is the part that's probably most impressive to me, are the number of developers on there. Again, having managed a traditional enterprise development team, I know how long it takes to bring functionality to market. And I watch how rapidly similar functionality comes to market with an open source project where you've got these number of people. Some of them are maybe only contributing a couple of times a week. Others are full-time on it. But the point is, this technology is absolutely changing the way that you start to think about traditional enterprise storage, because you have a very fully featured, in this case, it is an open source software-defined storage product. So in the examples I talked about before, there was that software cost. The software cost is the licensing cost you pay for the software. When you talk about open source software, there is no licensing cost. You're even driving the pricing down further. Now you can elect to choose any one of these companies who will be happy to support the product for you. And that's the other point I would drive home as well. Intel, Fujitsu, SanDisk, Cisco, SUSE, Red Hat, Canonical. These are companies that have been around for 15 years, 20 years. So when you make a decision to go to something like a software-defined storage product, you also need to make sure, there are 50, 60 companies playing in this space. So I was talking with Gartner and IDC earlier this week. They estimate that the shakeout is going to be over the next couple of years. They see probably 75 to 80% of those companies going out of business over the next couple of years. So as you make this transition to a software-defined storage product, it's imperative that you understand, is that company going to be there, or is that technology going to be there in the next couple of years? This is the beauty of open source with this kind of a backing and this kind of a company base behind it. It will absolutely be here 2 years from now. All right, let's come back and talk about how, in this case, software-defined storage addresses those three problems we identified at the first. So exponential growth and my inability to scale. So Ceph and SUSE Enterprise Storage, which is based on Ceph, scales without bounds. So I was at Geneva earlier this year, where we hosted what we call a Ceph Day event. It was hosted by CERN. CERN was one of the board members for the Ceph project. CERN runs the Hadron Collider. You can get some idea every time one of those events occur, how much data, scientific data, they generate. They've selected Ceph because in their perspective, it will enable them to continue to scale at tens of a petabyte at a time as they need to add that kind of capacity into the cluster. But there's another point to this as well, and I want to draw your attention to the top here. Unified architecture. So unified architecture usually means block and file. We're redefining unified architecture to mean block and file and object, all within one system. I do not know of another either proprietary or open source software-defined storage product that is block and file and object, all within one system. So you can, within this single system that scales tremendously, have a high-performance deployment of block, maybe erasure-coded, lower performance, but more capacity-oriented object deployment, a high-performance file, a caching where I have a cached solid-state infrastructure in front of a block erasure-coded. Again, tremendous flexibility around block and file and object, high performance, more capacity optimized, all within a single system that you learn on once, or you train your organization on once, and you can start to apply it to multiple use cases. One of the other dirty secrets about the traditional enterprise business is the more I can sell you a point product, and the more I can get you locked in to that point product. Yeah, maybe I can't get you locked into hardware anymore, but if I can get you locked into a point product that's maybe, for example, a file-based software-defined storage product that you use for just this application, the higher I can keep my margins and the more I can charge you. This is a unified architecture, block, file, and object that scales and scales without bounds. Secondly, the flexibility of it when you talk about not just reducing my capital expenditures because I can run on industry standard hardware where the business runs on a 10 to 15% margin, but there's a couple of other points to drive home as well. The latest hardware. It's probably no secret that when you design a traditional enterprise product, your hardware team will go out when they do their initial prototype design, and they'll lock on the set of hardware that you're going to use when the product comes to market. The drives, the memory, the processors. It takes 9 months to 12 months to bring that to market. So not only are you paying a premium, but you're buying hardware that's 9 to 12 months old when it finally comes out. The advantage of software-defined storage is you can get the latest hardware. I can run processors today when they come out, memory today when it comes out, disk drives today when they come out. And within that same cluster, I can run, frankly, I can have HP hardware and Dell hardware in the same cluster. I can have hardware that's 2 years old, 4 years old, running in the same cluster as hardware that's brand new. I can buy my latest HP systems, bring them in, and I've got systems that are 5 years old that have depreciated out. I can migrate the data onto the new systems and then deprecate the old hardware, all within this cluster that continues to expand and continues to scale. And last, because it's a software-defined storage product, it can go with you into a traditional deployment. One of SUSE's key focus areas, we see the importance of recognizing that many of our customers run in traditional enterprise environments today. That's why we brought iSCSI to market. We pushed iSCSI upstream for Ceph because we saw the importance of enabling you to connect to Windows, to VMware. Yes, we are a Linux company, but your data centers are not purely Linux. Half of our connect today is on VMware, right? It's not on Linux because customers can see the value proposition of an iSCSI interface that they can run on the operating system that they have. And as they become comfortable with this, and as they make that transition, because over the next 3 to 5 years, most of the customers we're talking about recognize the need to go to this software-defined infrastructure. If I have a software-defined storage product that I'm already comfortable with, it's that much easier to make a transition because it minimizes the amount of change that I have to do when I make that transition. All right, and let's come back to large data. Again, object storage is designed to handle these very large files. And I'm going to reinforce this in just a second. But first, we can drive the cost down. Not $2, $4, $5 per gigabyte, 30 cents per gigabyte. And again, this is list price, not street price. 30 cents per gigabyte street price. I can have a single system that gives me tremendous flexibility around how I want to manage performance. Do I need NVMe as a cache on top of solid state? Yes. If you do, you can do that within a software-defined storage product like SUSE Enterprise Storage. I can put solid state in front of regular spinning media. Again, tremendous flexibility, block, file, and object use cases as well. And you can go through the list. It's much easier to manage because it's a single unified architecture. It scales into the exabytes. Again, it checks off, we believe, most of these primary issues we're hearing from customers as we talk with them. So let's talk about version 4. So version 4 was introduced on Tuesday. The 3 primary things that we emphasize with version 4, first is the support for file protocol. So SUSE is the first to give you production support within the Ceph environment of the file protocol, Ceph-FS. We have significant confidence in our decade-and-a-half experience with distributed file systems that we can provide enterprise-class support for Ceph-FS. And so there are specific use cases that we're supporting as the product comes out. But first to market with Ceph-FS support. Secondly, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second, is the acquisition of the assets of a company called IT Novum around a product called OpenAttic. And I'll just briefly touch on that in a second. And the third is recognizing that in addition to software flexibility, customers want hardware flexibility as well. And so we are supporting with SUSE Enterprise Storage 4 the ARM hardware platform. All right, let me talk a little bit more about the OpenAttic acquisition for just a second. So the other point that we hear from customers as we visit with them is, how do you make this product easier to manage, easier to monitor, easier to install in my day-to-day operation? So we looked at the industry and what options existed to manage Ceph. We identified a company called IT Novum. Now, IT Novum has been doing enterprise storage management for about 15 years. We found it easier to take someone who understands how you manage traditional enterprise storage and have them work with us to create a Ceph management package than find someone who knew how to manage Ceph and teach them all the principles about how you manage traditional enterprise storage. So this will have a lot of the paradigms and a lot of the use cases and a lot of the look and feel of a traditional enterprise storage management package. Our commitment, we worked with this organization over the last year and a half, and we feel the best thing we can do is to acquire that team, acquire the assets, bring them into SUSE, so we ensure that that commitment remains to the upstream project, that this will remain open source, remain available, and so this is why we brought the OpenAttic team over. And again, it's part of our, and you'll see it as we talk about a roadmap session later today, you'll see our continued investment in OpenAttic. In fact, there's an OpenAttic presentation if you'd like to go see it, where they can talk in detail about this tool. All right, let's talk about some of the use cases. And we have customers today running all of these use cases that we're going to go through. So the first point, and I touched on this earlier, 80% of the data out there today is unstructured data. It's not a relational database. It's that large Excel file, it's the JPEG image, it's a bunch of pictures, it's a PowerPoint presentation. That's the majority of the data that's out there today. Using a traditional enterprise storage product that was designed for relational databases to store unstructured data is not only expensive, it isn't the optimal way to do it. You need a product that was designed like an object store to store this kind of information. We still recognize that there is still 20% of your data where you would purchase those traditional enterprise products and continue to deploy them because they're designed and they're optimized for that. But start to look for use cases. Let me give you some examples of what we have. So we have, again, Nova Coast, Orchard Park, Experian PH, all three of them are giving presentations today or yesterday around their transition using software-defined storage based on SUSE from traditional enterprise. So there are customers here today that you can talk to, as in addition to SUSE, that will walk through and tell you about their experiences as they transitioned. So large data. So we talked about those 100 gigabyte files. Again, there's a tremendous amount of information that's scientific data, or even if you look at MRIs or other X-rays, JPEGs that become fairly large. We've got customers that are using rich media and using this as a content store for rich media or other sorts of information. Orchard Park is a good example of video surveillance. Airports, municipalities, casinos, police departments, just look at how many video devices there are today. Storing video is extremely expensive when you talk about traditional storage. Orchard Park is here. The chief of police is actually here, and they can walk you through there. He's quite a character if you listen to the presentation. But they'll walk you through their experience as they've transitioned to software-defined storage. We've got a couple of customers, and I can't mention their names, that were using traditional enterprise storage, and they had to stop using it because they couldn't afford it. This is where an object store is perfectly designed for something such as large amounts of data that video surveillance generates. We announced earlier this year that we're supported with HP Data Protector. We announced this week that we're supported now with Commvault as a backup target. So as you look at archive, how do I keep an active archive, or how do I move data off of my primary storage device, that 10 to 15% at the top? If I've got files out there that I haven't touched or accessed in 6 months, I may want to move them to a large object store where I can store them much more cost effectively. There are applications to enable you to do that. Again, we touched on the financial records, 150 gigabyte spreadsheets. I never thought I would see the day, but it's not uncommon. And again, the medical records, MRIs, things of that nature. And of course, there is just using virtual machines, either standalone, VMware, or within the OpenStack environment. Again, half of our connection is within OpenStack, but half of our connection is outside of OpenStack. You've got a tremendous flexibility on how you want to use this product. All right, so just in summary, hopefully I've driven home the cost savings and the opportunity you have as you look at your budgets, which are flat. or relatively flat, giving you some flexibility or some things to think about around how I can bring a software-defined storage product into my storage portfolio, identify some use cases, and begin the process of starting to do the savings that you can with a software-defined product relative to a traditional enterprise product. Emphasizing the flexibility of it, right? Whether it is the hardware that you wish to use, the types of hardware you wish to use, or the fact that it is an object, a block, and a file store all within one product. And last, confidence, right? SUSE has been supporting high availability configurations and file systems for 20 years. You saw the community of other companies that are behind this. Ceph is a very safe choice when you talk about a software-defined storage product, and SUSE is a very safe choice as well when you look to a partner to support you if you deploy Ceph. All right, with that, let's see what questions we have. Make sense? Please.
So you talk about being able to have a mixed environment of hardware, different ranges. How does that affect performance, or do you not find any performance between some old kit and new kit and the latest? Surely some things do change.
And yes, the question was with how you deploy that hardware. Now I should come back so Ceph has the capability, and we'll talk about this more in some of the more technical sessions, you define the concept of a pool. And within that pool, I can define the hardware that I have in that pool. So although it is a virtualized product, I can still have a high performance pool, and I may choose in that high performance pool to have it be the latest hardware or a particular type of solid state device, but I can allocate a pool, and within that pool, the storage or the data will be stored in that high performance configuration. I can use my older data then if I wished to store older, maybe data that's not as important or different ways to tier it. There's tremendous flexibility in the architecture that doesn't just constrain you to sharing a single type of storage across all the hardware that's out there. So there's some intelligent planning that you can do to kind of target your data onto the specific use cases, if that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay, so in effect there may be some performance differences between the different hardware, and
yes,
you intelligently just place the data where it suits you on that.
And then the customer can also say, look, I want to make sure I constrain this older hardware to this particular pool. Okay? Other questions? You guys are quiet. All right, well, I'll be around if there's other questions. Appreciate your time. Thanks.